Welcome back. It's World Environment Day and it's been observed under the theme Beat Plastic Pollution. According to the United Nations, over 400 million tons of plastic is produced yearly globally, while here in South Africa, 2.4 million of plastic is generated every year. To speak about the impact of waste management on the environment, I'm joined now by Interwaste spokesperson Kate Stubbs. Kate, thank you so much for your time this evening. Can you first of all give us some context on the magnitude of South Africa's waste problem in comparison to global averages?
Yeah, sure. When you listen to that stat that globally we produce 430 million tons of plastic, and in South Africa only 2.4 million tons, we may think that we don't really have a problem, but it's all relative. In South Africa, we currently produce about 122 million tons of waste a year, and most of our landfills around the country are reaching capacity. Only about 10% of all that waste is recycled. And so we really do have a looming waste crisis, and we desperately need ways to look at reusing and repurposing our waste and preventing the pollution that's happening in our country. So we certainly have a looming waste crisis on our hands.
Out of sight, out of mind is certainly true for many people when it comes to waste disposal. Once it's in the bin, we don't give a second thought to where it will end up. There are sure some people who are very conscious in terms of recycling, making sure they dispose of certain types of waste in certain ways. But as we observe World Environment Day today, we have to ask ourselves what role waste plays in our environment in South Africa. So where does the most waste come from? From businesses and industries or from individual households?
It's about half-half. I mean, we've got about 61 million South Africans, or just over 60 million South Africans, and on average, each South African generates 1.5 kilograms of waste a day. So we have a huge amount of municipal solid waste. That's waste coming from our households. So about half of the waste is from households, and the other half from industry. And it's everyone's responsibility. You're absolutely right. You may think you're a good citizen by putting your waste in the dustbin and then it's gone. But where does it go to? That's what we've got to be asking ourselves. Our landfills, as I said, are running out of capacity. It's estimated that 17 billion rands worth of resources are thrown away to landfill or disposed of that we could be reusing back into our economy. And we have a power crisis on our hands right now, and there are many global solutions for using waste as an energy source. So I mean, this World Environment Day, the focus is on plastic waste because plastic waste is a huge problem. But in South Africa, we have a multitude of problems, and I really think we need to look at waste as a resource and think about what else we can do with it rather than discarding it and polluting our systems.
So often problems only get addressed when they're on the agenda. We know there are a number of global agreements dealing specifically with environmental impact to reduce our impact on the planet. But tell us a little bit about the impact of legislation on protecting our planet when it comes to waste. Things such as EPR, sectoral emission targets, and national climate change adaptation strategies.
I mean, South Africa was slightly behind developed countries, but therefore our waste legislation is actually relatively new and very forward-thinking. So we have a solid waste legislation which is continually evolving. So something like the EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Program, was promulgated just over 2 years ago. And really what that does is put onus on the producers to take responsibility for their product, not just to point of sale, but to afterlife, so post-consumer use. And that really means that packaging waste, all sorts of cans, glass, different types of waste, that producers need to take responsibility of how they collect that waste and you reuse it back into the system. That's just one type of the legislation. We have all sorts of, our national waste management strategy is really focused about diverting waste from landfill and creating this green economy. We need to create jobs. There's certainly an onus on that, and there are opportunities to look at investing in waste beneficiation. We have carbon tax being implemented slowly, which also changes behavior. But actually the base of our waste legislation, the National Environmental Management Waste Act, has since 2013 been banning certain types of waste from landfill disposal. Now, each year, those bans are banning different types of hazardous waste. I mean, 2019, liquid waste banned from landfill disposal. The up-and-coming one in 2027 is organic waste. So our food waste, sewage sludges, abattoir waste will be banned from landfill. And those type of legislative regulations force change. So, I mean, we're moving to a point where we've got strong legislation sort of guiding the change, but we've also have consumers and global awareness saying, we can't continue living like this. We can't continue operating like this. We need to change. So legislation certainly in South Africa is playing a role in innovation and driving the change.
So implementation on, very much a ground level of that legislation seems to me, I'm worried that it might not be problematic, because in so many of our communities, service delivery, it's a blessing when it does happen. And when it does happen, sometimes it happens inefficiently due to certain constraints that we're all aware of. So banning things like abattoir waste, liquid waste, organic waste from landfills, that's one thing. But seeing that happen in practice when so many of our households are only too glad that they actually get their bins collected in the first place, and separating the waste just doesn't really happen. That's another thing. So incentivizing this legislation for people to want to buy in and to want to comply is a big part of it. And you spoke about creating jobs. One man's trash is another man's treasure. So how can we create jobs out of waste management that will incentivize a lot of people getting involved in the sorting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need systemic change. So I like to say, because some people say the problem's so big, my little bit of recycling doesn't make a difference. So we do need infrastructure. We need a collective effort from government and private sector to put systems in place to facilitate the likes of, we have the informal waste pickers, and there's anything from 30 to 120,000, probably a lot more. And those are the ladies and gentlemen who are in our suburbs collecting waste, making a living. And I mean, there's certainly ways and mechanisms where we need to include them or make their lives easier in order to recycle and not have to haul that waste such long distances. And also the legislative changes and bans, you're right. I mean, the implementation is still quite tough, and the enforcement is actually our biggest problem with waste legislation and just the shift changing. But what they do is, when I talk about creating jobs, let's talk about organic waste, because it's up and coming. We're looking at biogas plants, we're looking at composting, we're looking at different ways of creating energy. There are ways to create new skills through that process. However, the success of recycling programs, reuse programs, waste programs in Europe is largely driven by incentives from government. And so your point about incentives, right, not only incentivizing the people, but for those business models to be competitive, there are landfill taxes and there are subsidies given. So landfill tax is making disposal of waste to landfill very expensive, and the tax gain from that, the money gained from that tax, is put into programs to incentivize and subsidize waste reuse programs. And so that's why they are sustainable and successful. So we need the collective and the collaborative effort in order to make this really real for the general average South African, and also to clean up our environment. It sounds great. It's not that simple to implement, but I think I'm an optimist, and we are able to see there are lots and lots of small businesses being created in South Africa in this space. It's tough, but there are people doing amazing stuff. We just need more of it.
And I think as South Africans, we tend to complain a lot about the things that don't work, but the areas where we pretty much have free reign and where we are not taxed or penalized like European or Western countries perhaps are, we're only too glad about those areas, but we need to get on board, as you say, make it a collective effort. Thank you so much for speaking to us on this World Environment Day. That was Interwaste spokesperson Kate Stubbs talking to us about some key points in waste management.